Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of that Star Trek podcast, your place for a detailed analysis and speculation of all things Trek. My name is Sean Ray, and I have another exciting and very special episode for you guys today. As you know, we've been doing our time travel series. So we've been going back and we've been watching all of the Star Trek episodes that have to do with time travel, that use time travel as a plot point. But before that, we were doing our crossover series, and we were watching and reviewing all of the episodes of The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise that had a character or some aspect of the original series cross over into that new timeline. We finished up all of the episodes, all the TV episodes, and the films that dealt with crossovers like Star Trek Generations. But we wanted to talk about some of the books and not necessarily go into a detailed point by point discussion of the plot of each of these novels. What we wanted to do was try to reach out to some of the Star Trek novelists that wrote these books and bring them on, talk to them about how they came up with the idea, how they were approached from the studio about the idea, what the process was like to come up with that, and also talk with them about some of their other work, because a lot of these Star Trek authors wrote several books. They wrote many books. So we started this week with the very talented and legendary, as far as I'm concerned, husband and wife writing team, Judith and Garfield Reeves-Stevens. You probably recognize their name because they not only wrote a lot of Star Trek, they wrote 10 Star Trek novels on their own. They also wrote 10 Star Trek novels with William Shatner. You've ever heard of the Shatnerverse? They helped create that. We brought them in on the crossover series to talk about their books, which involve a lot of crossovers, because the Shatnerverse really does delve into crossovers with a lot of characters from The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine showing up. And of course, Captain Kirk is a main character in that series. But mainly we wanted to talk about their book Federation, which was the first novel that they wrote that had a crossover. It was their third Star Trek novel, and it came out in the 90s, and it deals with Zefram Cochrane going on an adventure that spans from the original series into the Next Generation timeline, and actually brings those two crews together into a situation where they have to rely on each other to save each other's ships and crews. And it's really an interesting read. I highly recommend it. If you've never read Federation, go out and try and find that. It came out in the mid-90s. It was re-released in 2004 with a new cover. So most bookstores still carry it. Most of the big box bookstores, like your Barnes and Nobles and things like that. And I also know that you can get the e-version on Amazon, and it's only a few dollars. It's not very expensive. So try and go check that out. And if you've never read any of the Shatnerverse novels, I recommend them. They're a lot of fun. If you just want to play in a big sandbox of Star Trek, bringing all these aspects of Star Trek into one series where Captain Kirk comes back to life, the Borg bring him back to life, future Spock is still there. There's Deep Space Nine characters. There's Next Generation characters. Eventually, they dive into the mirror universe. It's just a lot of fun. And there's 9 of those Shatnerverse novels. And then there's also a book that they wrote after that with William Shatner that kind of tells the history of Captain Kirk going into the Academy when he was young. So go and check that stuff out. It's all still available. The Reeves-Stevens are people that I've been reading for most of my life. They also worked on season 4 of Enterprise that wrote a lot of those episodes. They wrote for Batman, the animated series. They've had a wonderful and storied career, and it was very exciting for Scott and I to be able to sit down and talk with them. So I'm not going to waste a lot of time. I want you to hear and watch the episode in just a minute. Before I let you go do that, I want to tell you a couple of things. First of all, you can find all of our episodes of this show, as well as everything else that we do as part of the Infinite Potato Alliance, by going to our website at infinitepotato.com. Click on our show icon. You can find all of our contact information, including our email address and links to our Facebook group and our Twitter page. Come join all of that stuff because we share things that all the time that you might enjoy. Also, please give us a rating on Apple Podcasts. It goes a long way toward helping the show grow and helping new people that are looking for a Star Trek podcast, help them find us by giving us a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. And don't forget about our Patreon page. If you want bonus content, you want special episodes, you want early access to the podcast, then it's only a couple of bucks a month. Find out if you want to find out more, go to patreon.com/infinitepotato. We've already got a review on there of Kingdom of the Spiders from the 70s. We're going to be doing an audio commentary of Plan 9 from Outer Space. That's going to be coming out in May. So you definitely want to go and check that out. And that'll do it. If you're listening to the podcast, then you're about to hear the theme music and then the interview. If you're watching on YouTube, then we're just going to go into the interview. But either way, enjoy it, and I will talk to you on the next episode. Thanks. The first thing I want to ask you is, how has the pandemic been treating you? You guys been able to keep yourself safe and everything?
Yeah.
Safe, and we're writers. So life has rarely changed.
We're hermits.
Yes.
Right.
Done no traveling, and we had finished production on our last Alien Stole My Body movie.
For Universal, Netflix.
And so we'd finished that, so there was no need to leave the house.
And we're in development.
Yeah, so we're just writing.
So development is in-house.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, great. Okay. Where are you guys living at now?
We're on an island off the west coast of Canada.
North of
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
That's right. With grizzly bears.
Grizzly bears.
With grizzly bears.
Yeah.
So the series that we're doing for our podcast is we're talking about crossovers. So we've done a rewatch of all of the Star Trek episodes, the TNG and the DS9 and the Enterprise episodes where original series characters crossed over with the newer characters. So we finished doing all of the TV shows, and now we're going back and we're doing some of the books.
Oh,
and so we wanted to invite you on because we know that you wrote the book Federation.
Mm-hmm.
You were also involved in writing The Return, which had some crossover. So we were going to talk to you guys about some of that stuff. So, but I don't want to just talk about that because I've been reading you guys for 25 years, and we want to talk to you about other stuff too. So how long have you been writing?
Gosh, I think it's gone back into the mists of time.
1980 maybe was
yeah,
the first.
I think
80, and we were writing before that the textbooks.
But not together. Well, we're doing textbooks, but science and technology.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Well, you're known as a husband and wife writing team.
Mm-hmm.
How does that work? Because my wife and I can't put together furniture without arguing.
It's binary, right? It either works or it doesn't.
It doesn't. We came to it very slowly.
Yeah, we started on
because we were
doing a series that we created.
Right.
It took us 3 years to get the same voice.
Yeah. Well, in fiction.
Like in fiction, to get one voice.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And but yes, I actually, we were married. I was doing book design and production. Judy was an editor. She was writing on a series. I was designing it and thought that, well, some of the science stuff in it isn't completely up to date. And so I started writing for Judy. And then we wrote together on a science and technology textbook series.
For grades 1, 2, and 3.
And,
yes.
And then
we created it.
Yeah. And then after spending so many years talking to ministries of education across
years, and that was enough.
And we said, let's do something fun.
Right.
When we wrote our first Star Trek novel.
We just contacted New York and the publishing office, and they just want to know if we had an agent. And we said yes. And they said, it's okay, we'll send in some outlines.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them was Memory Prime.
Okay. Well, do you guys normally like sit down and work out the story together, and then one of you write a chapter and just take turns, or just one of you writes the entire?
It's
every other word
all the time, and
right.
It was fun. We were sort of thinking back on Federation, which has a really strange origin story. But I remember the first time I read the complete book in the right order was when we got pages, proof pages back from the publisher.
Yeah.
Because we were writing
All
that
over.
one completely out of sequence.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So,
And story development for us is just knock down, drag them out.
Yeah.
We just talk story all day,
mhm.
and we just keep keeping notes and shifting things back and forth, and that's how you get one voice.
Right. Yeah. So you've written like 20 Star Trek novels. 10 of them you wrote with William Shatner. You've written novels for the original series, The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine. Which set of characters do you enjoy writing for the most?
Oh, it's got
It
to
all
be
starts with the original.
the original.
They're
Okay.
they're classic characters. Yeah, they were classic.
But I'd say we did reread Federation this week to prepare for this, and it was a lot of fun going back to the next gen characters all together, because we haven't actually written a next generation novel. We've used characters from the next generation
Right.
crossover, especially with the ones in the Shatnerverse, and so for our own purposes, like for Millennium, we borrow a couple of characters, but never the whole ensemble.
But it's kind of like Marvel. There's just so many characters,
Yes.
and you can create huge shared universe stories.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm kind of, and that's kind of the norm these days with fiction. Yeah, as far as like what Marvel is doing, what DC has done, where they just take all of their characters that they own and they just put them in stuff together.
Yes.
And Star Trek kind of kept everything separate, except every once in a while there would be like an event where they would cross things over. But now I've got to admit, I read Federation when I was in high school. And to prepare for this, I listened to the audiobook. Now I noticed differences in the audiobook. And for one thing, I was just talking to Scott before you guys came on, that it seemed like the audiobook was more linear than the actual book was, because what I remember is that the book went back and forth.
Yes.
Between the old characters and the new characters, and all the way through the book it was back and forth. And then the audiobook didn't do that. It kind of did one set of characters and then the other set of characters.
Not only did it abridge the text and remove what someone thought was unnecessary material, but it also forced it into a linear flow rather than non-linear storytelling, which I like non-linear storytelling when it's done properly. So for them, whoever put the audiobook together, to decide to rearrange the order of events of the story and to remove stuff. I've never been a fan of abridged audiobooks. I used to work in a store that dealt exclusively in audiobooks, like a video rental store, but just for audiobooks. And I spent 4 years working there. And that's where I developed my love of unabridged audiobooks.
Yes.
And my complete disrespect for abridged audiobooks. So in my opinion, whoever put together Federation, the only thing they did right was to have Mark Leonard read it. And that's it.
We had a great experience with those. Well, it was very entertaining. It's a very different medium to write. And they asked us to do one. Was that Prime Directive?
Prime Directive.
And we had Jimmy Doohan.
Yeah.
And the book was 125,000 words.
110.
And we brought it down to, I think, about 11,000 words for the script. And then Jimmy Doohan read it really slowly. And we had to take out another couple thousand words
from the tape.
And by the time we finished, we thought, well, that was an experience, and it was fun. We listened to him record it.
But it's a talent.
But that's a
completely
different writing.
And then our friend Vonda McIntyre.
Oh yeah,
Vonda. And she told us about her experience writing the audio tape for maybe Enterprise, and she said, so I got it down to 10,000 words, and I asked myself, if I could tell the story in 10,000 words, why did I need all those other words?
Well, you mentioned a minute ago that Federation had an origin story. So, what was the origin of the story?
Well, the first time we proposed that story, so Memory Prime had come out as a paperback, and we said, well, here's another idea. I was putting Kirk, time travel adventure with Cochrane. Cochrane being chased by the bad guys, and everything leading up to the birth of the Federation. And they sort of said, no, not yet. And then when Next Generation came out, we proposed it again. And our editor said, oh, this is great. Kirk and Picard together in the same story. Let's do this.
With Cochrane again.
Yeah. And it filled out the story tremendously to have Picard. So we actually had the changes. Because the very first, I guess, intimation.
I like intimation better than intimidation.
Yes. After, I guess, while Memory Prime was coming out, and we were talking about Star Trek history.
Yeah.
And Judy noted that there was about 350 years of events in Star Trek.
We love sagas, and we thought it was like James Michener.
And you said that what Star Trek needs is a James Michener type novel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what made us think, okay, let's write one that spans the centuries. Go big. And so Pocketbook was all in favor. They said, let's do it. And they said, we're going to be doing hardcovers now. Spock's World, I guess, was coming out. And they said, you're going to be the next one. You're going to be Federation, the second book. And we said, that's great. And then Paramount got the story. And they said, no, we're not doing this.
We're not mixing these two characters.
And we got a phone call from the editor who was a bit panicked because we were slotted in for a hardcover. And
they didn't have another hardcover for that slot. And we went back to the keyboard and we wrote Prime Directive.
Yeah. But we got the phone call in the morning, and it was wintertime in Toronto, I guess. And we went
for a walk
in the snow.
And we blocked out Prime Directive.
Because there'd been a story, a non-Star Trek story we'd been thinking about. We thought, well, can we make that a Star Trek story? And that was Prime Directive.
And that was Prime Directive.
Okay, that's interesting.
And then it continued.
And then it continued because it was a couple of years later, and our editor said, remember that Federation outline? The time is right. We can do it now. Right.
We can go back and do it again.
So we thought, wonderful. We dusted off the story. We expanded it again. We sent it into them. This time Paramount signed off on it. So it was great. We were off writing it. And then sort of about a month after signing the contract, they said, oh, and by the way, Kirk and Picard can't meet in your book.
Because they're going to be meeting in the movies.
And
we said, oh, okay. And at that point, we came up with the black hole.
With the black hole and the prisoner's dilemma.
And the prisoner's dilemma.
So was that your original plan, was to have the crews completely interact with each other and everything?
Yes.
Yes, they would have.
They were going to be on the same planet at the same time, talking to each other. And of course, Picard would know exactly who Kirk and the others were. And Kirk would be trying not to obtain any information about the future.
But it ended up being really fun, being forced to deal with the prisoner's dilemma. Yeah. And then it came out, and then I think the book buying public was unsure because it came out with the Generations novelization, and they weren't sure which one was the book that they should be reading.
Yeah.
So,
Federation.
So I think we got a few more copies of Federation sold.
It came out a few months before the movie came out.
That's right.
And they were, Paramount was nice. They invited us.
Yeah.
We went over to the lot. They locked us in a room, and we were allowed to read the script.
So we could read the script for Generations.
And but we
so
could
we could then keep away from them.
Now I like James Cromwell played Cochrane in in First Contact, and I liked his portrayal. But to tell you the truth, I like the voice of the character in this book more. It seemed more like the Cochrane that we had met on the original series. They tried to make the Cochrane in First Contact more of a, alcoholic and and all of that. But
they were that. We understand that approach, which
we actually wrote about that in the foreword, the afterward.
For Federation.
For Federation, we just said is 85% of what you read about Cochrane here is our invention. Others will come along and could easily do that in future iterations of this character, and that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, we've had Michael Jan Friedman and David Mack on the show before, and I've asked them if it's irritating when you write something and then something comes out in canon later that kind of disputes what you wrote or changes the character from the way that you wrote, which I know that they've always said that the Trek novels are not canon,
Right.
but as a writer,
Mhm.
I imagine that would be a little bit irritating when you watch something on screen that contradicts what you had mapped out in your mind for so long.
Not
Wouldn't you
really.
say that one of the interesting things we learned about writing in that shared universe, because that was pretty much the first shared universe we wrote in,
Mhm.
is that when we were introduced to people at book signings and at conventions, it was really interesting because we knew a lot of the other writers, and everyone has their own take on characters, and they all develop their own fan bases. And it was that spoke to them, and that was an interesting thing in shared universe writing. You don't control it.
Right. And so it's in the sense that, like, in a non-licensed novel that we're in charge of. That's
It's freedom.
our creative direction. But then we knowingly signed on to write Star Trek novels for the copyright holder, Paramount.
Right.
And so we know the conditions under which we were writing. So we did.
But you write it as you see it.
As you see it. Yeah.
As you see it. Yeah.
I had been wondering, and this is in between being distracted by the background you guys had, because the shelves that you have are far more impressive than the shelves I have behind me, and I can. I see Star Trek novels behind you. I see even Batman animated series DVDs up in the corner. So if I didn't already like you guys as much as I do now.
You guys wrote for Batman, right?
Yeah.
Oh, we had such fun on that. Michael Reeves brought us in there.
Yep.
And we loved that. And we got the distinction of being right behind Christopher Nolan in the best way to have shown the death of his parents.
Oh, yeah.
That's right. But really, the art department had a great deal to do with that.
That was great. We got called in. I'd written a short story for The Further Adventures of the Joker. So Batman was huge. I'd written this little story about Batman and Joker in Arkham Asylum. And Michael Reeves called us up and said,
Michael had read that.
How would you like to turn that into an episode of Batman the Animated Series? And we, at that point, had not written animation, though before we got the assignment, we had written one episode, I think, of something.
Yeah.
And so we said, sure. And then it was this traditional Hollywood story of, we wrote this episode, and the final episode had no connection to my short story other than Arkham.
And we just turned it into something else. Yeah. But we loved doing that one.
Yeah. We talked to David Mack, and he is credited with writing one of the episodes of Deep Space Nine. Scott, you'll have to remind me of the title. It's the one where Nog lost his leg.
Oh, the Siege of AR 553, 558. The Siege of AR 5.
Oh, it wasn't that episode. It was one of the follow-up episodes where he's kind of dealing with the aftermath of PTSD and everything.
It's only a paper moon. Sorry.
Yeah, and he so he's credited with writing that. And we talked to him about that, and he said, well, actually, I wrote a story that they got an idea from, and they turned it into that episode. It doesn't look anything like what I originally wrote, but because it came from my idea, I'm credited with a writing credit on it. So.
But this was totally our work when it went to camera.
In the first year of Deep Space Nine, friends of ours went in to pitch. And this is the whole thing, the commonality of what we all do as writers. And they went in to pitch to Michael Piller. This is the first season was still on. They pitched this story to Michael Piller.
And they said, we love it so much. If you turn on the television tomorrow, you will see that story.
And they had pitched a story beat for beat. That was an episode that was already filmed.
Had already been filmed, gone through post.
It's something, but it's because everybody's thinking the same way about the same characters in the same place, and especially in the first season of the series.
Oh, the first season's hard.
The commonality is it's quite common.
I used to be, well, I'm still an aspiring writer. I've had a few short stories published and things like that. Nothing like what you guys have done. But when I was in high school, I was a big fan of the show Sliders. And I had dreams that I was going to write a screenplay. I was going to write an episode of that. Right. So one of are you familiar with Sliders at all?
Oh yes, yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes.
Okay. So my idea was that I was going to have them go to a world where Rembrandt was still famous. And I started writing that script. And then, as I'm writing it, they aired an episode where they go to a world where Rembrandt's still famous. So I was like,
So you
well,
knew you
back
could
to
be a
the old
writer.
drawing board. Yeah.
The first couple of times we went around pitching to shows, we were literally surprised the number of times we would pitch a story.
And they'd stop you pretty quickly.
They'd say, oh, we've heard that one 10 times.
Yep.
Yeah.
But it tells you that you're in the same zeitgeist,
Yeah.
and that tells you you're a writer.
Mm-hmm.
That because you're thinking in that same bath as they are.
Scott, I interrupted you a minute ago when you were complimenting their background, and
Oh.
you were going to say something else. And I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
Well, I was starting to head in the direction of after I heard mention of the further adventures of the Joker.
Mm-hmm.
I was struck with a sharp sadness because I used to have that book.
Oh.
And I no longer have that book. I read it. I'm pretty sure I got it, and I started reading it in about the 5th grade.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the stories really made me think, perhaps I shouldn't be reading this book. Perhaps this is for people older than 5th grade. But I read it anyway. Unfortunately, that's the only time I read it was back then. I hadn't read it since then, and I no longer have the book. I had that. I had the Further Adventures of Batman, which came before it, and then another volume of the Further Adventures of Batman with the Penguin on the cover, which told me it was going to be boring because I didn't know. I judged books by their cover when I was that young. But by now, I no longer have those books, and it's been so long that I don't really remember any of the stories in them. And I certainly was not paying attention to the names of the authors back then. So now I feel bad because I didn't know that it was you guys, and I'm sad that I can't go back and reread the story to become familiar with it again. So aside from all of that Batman talk, what I had been wondering is, and this is based on my own desire to at some point have seen Peter David's New Frontiers series adapted for the screen somehow. I always thought that would have worked very well. I haven't read the entire series, but I've read the first several books, and I always felt that would have lent itself very well to a televised series like all the others. So it had me wondering if there was an aspect or a component of non-canon Star Trek books or comics or any of the alternate media, whether it was written by you or not, that you would like to see made part of the canon.
Like Captain Kirk being resurrected by the Borg or something. We, in a moment of weakness, did write a proposal for a continuation, a CG continuation of the original series, and as if it was the next season, which a lot of people have done, and in a further more extreme weakness, we came up with a new Star Trek series, but the time isn't right for something like that yet. Enterprise, we were very happy that Manny Coto was taking it back to some of the core essence of the original series.
That had a nice directness to it and a real energy. We loved working with Manny.
Yeah, and so I guess it's more it's not the characters or what the story is. It's the essence of Star Trek, and we would like to see more of that. And
the showrunners are a big part of that because they're the visionaries for them. But when you see what The Mandalorian did for Star Wars, just to somehow throw everything up and pull you right back in, and so there's always that thing that somewhere there's going to be somebody in grade 5, somebody's going to be right out there right now, and something, and they will have a dream of what they see it as, and it's going to happen. That's the lovely part of the longevity of these series.
Yes, yeah,
and the generations of people that are affected by them.
And Roddenberry said that himself. There's a quote we keep pulling up. and of course, now I can't remember it exactly, but it was something he said at a Star Trek convention in the 80s. And he said, there's going to be more Star Trek. We have the original series, we have Next Generation, Deep Space Nine was coming out. And he said, and they're all going to be different. But what will happen is you'll get to a point where people are going to say, well, this is the real Star Trek, not like that stuff they were doing back in the 60s.
But that's because it speaks to every time. Yeah, they all were different.
And that's the strength. That's the strength of Star Trek as a storytelling medium, that it is so rich.
But what we particularly like is you can, even with aliens with different forwards, you can connect it to what's going on at NASA. Or what's going on today. There somehow that has uniquely kept a hold sort of on extrapolation from our time, and that it could go into the future. And I think what everybody still responds to is that it has a feeling that we can be better, we can do better, we can do wonderful things. We loved what Rob Manning, who's the chief engineer now, said with the with Perseverance, and he just said, "This is what we do." And this is what we do really well, and the excitement there. We just remembered being in all their offices because we've done a number of nonfiction things with them, and they have everything from Star Trek. They have everything in there. And then when you went into the Star Trek art department with Mike and Denise Okuda, then you went in there, and what you saw was everything from NASA and JPL.
Yeah,
they're part of the same continuum. I'm not sure. Some of the fantasy episodes are the more fantasy, more fanciful ones, have got quite that same, their grip on you is different. But Star Trek's unique.
I wanted to ask you, going back to Federation, you guys in the novel, it's kind of bookended with Kirk visiting the Guardian of Forever. And the Guardian is something I know a lot of Star Trek novelists love to use the Guardian in their stories. Peter David used the Guardian in his Imzadi series, which I think came out about maybe a few years before.
Yeah.
But I was interested to find out if in your original ideas, if you were going to do more with the Guardian, were you actually going to have anybody go through the Guardian? Because this was just, we kind of had Kirk ask the Guardian a question, and then the story plays out as if it's the answer to that question.
Yes.
So I was wondering if your original idea had more involved, or if that was the idea.
Well, we used the Guardian in Star Trek Forever, which was the great unproduced Star Trek musical we wrote.
Yeah.
And the Guardian was the place.
Where
it all took place.
Central. Yes.
But no, I think my recollection is the very first time we wrote the Federation story, it was more time for Slingshot, helping Cochrane escape from his time, or from Kirk's time, to a future time. The Guardian is such a wonderful creation. That's
they just revisited it again in Star Trek Discovery just this past season.
Yep,
they brought it back. So now I wanted to ask you guys about the Shatnerverse. How did you get involved with William Shatner to start working on those stories?
It was after. It's funny. It's after Federation came out, and we thought, well, that's it. We've written our 3 Star Trek novels, and they called us up. And at this point, we were writing behind the scenes books about Star Trek because we were
doing the making of Deep Space Nine,
right? And because as they pointed out, hey, we're Star Trek book writers, and we live 20 minutes from the Paramount lot, so write these books.
And we're Canadian.
And we're Canadian.
And American.
And American.
And American. We're North Americans.
Yeah. And and the editor called us up and said Shatner had an idea for a novel, and he wants a writer to work with him. And I said, well, we're not ghostwriters. And they said, oh, no, you get full credit. And so they asked us, and we met with him, and he told us a great story.
The rest was history. Yes, over and over again.
Yeah.
How did it work? Did he just tell you what the idea was, and then just let you guys write it?
This one.
Each one was slightly different, and back and forth.
What the wrestling groups call ultra kayfabe. That we don't discuss that.
Yeah, but it was a lot of back and forth.
A lot of back and forth, but that
very few arguments.
Well, we're Canadian.
We're Canadian.
Yeah.
I was going to ask if there's. Well, yes. While Sean was looking for more questions, I was going to ask if there's anything more you can say about Star Trek Forever, because right after you mentioned it, I immediately searched Google on my phone, and nothing comes up for it.
No,
You type in Star Trek Forever, and all you get is The Guardian of Forever. That's all that comes up.
we had the script for it. We were flown out to the Guthrie Theater. We had 30 people reading all the parts. That was for the musical. But we also had done with Gene Roddenberry's. He chose us for writing the opera that was going to be done by the New York City Opera. They were going to have surtitles when the Klingons sang, and Philip Glass was supposed to do the music.
And Roddenberry had somehow selected us to write the story.
After you read Federation?
No, not Federation.
No, it wasn't Federation. Oh, Memory. Which one
Prime
was
Directive.
it? It was Prime Directive.
And their comic book.
And Ashes of Eden.
No,
a different one. The Life Science one.
Yes, Life Science.
Yeah, Life Science, the next gen one. Yeah.
And it was great because now Roddenberry had said 1990-ish, sort of the year before he died, that it was time to bring the generations together. And that was sort of the layup to Next Gen was going to do Sarek. And Sarek, of course, it had that moment that everybody was waiting for when Sarek says Spock. And then that season ended with Leonard Nimoy coming on in the last scene as Spock. And that was all 25th anniversary stuff. But when Roddenberry said it was time for the generations to come together, we were told by the folks at Paramount that for the opera, he wanted Kirk and Picard to actually meet. And
see, it still goes back to Federation.
Yeah.
And we said sure.
Right.
And then that whole thing collapsed because Paramount wasn't going to pay a penny for this.
It was the budget.
And New York Opera said, "Well, hold it. We're promoting your Star Trek. You have to
pay for it." And it just collapsed. We were just devastated. We were thinking that was going to be so much fun. I just thought of South Park, where they had Philip Glass doing the music for their winter holiday. And everybody's in jumpsuits.
I haven't watched South Park in many, many years, but I remember that one.
I remember that one, yeah.
The musical, though,
the musical was different.
Yeah, that was they were very serious about that, and they brought us on, and they paid us to write several drafts of the script. We wrote lyrics for at least one of the songs, and flew us around to hear the table read of it. And again, that was designed. There's going to be a big celebration in London. And the idea was to have 3 tents, and one tent was going to be like a museum, a Star Trek museum, and I forget what the second one was going to be. And the third one, they were going to put on the stage extravaganza.
It was going to be a traveling show.
And then it would eventually end up in Las Vegas. And it was great. A shuttle crash. The shuttlecraft actually flew across the audience to crash on stage to end Act 1. And it was great. And at the table read, the actors in this repertory theater in St. Louis, and they were all saying, "Oh, Star Trek, we don't ever watch it." But it was a pastiche of scenes and characters from other episodes. Yeah. And when the guy was doing Frank Gorshin's character from the black and white episode, he just nailed it. So we knew he had seen every episode.
Yeah, he had seen it.
And again, that was funding. That the funding for the big show never came through.
But they really had some interesting thoughts for things that just never came to be.
Yep.
But we had fun.
Yep.
It occurs to me now, Kurtzman does seem to be very keen on expanding the brand of Star Trek. Now, especially that Paramount and CBS are back together again. We have Discovery, we have Picard, we have Lower Decks, we have Strange New Worlds on the way. Perhaps the time is right for a stage musical, and I just want to point out, I am a bass baritone. Just for what it's worth.
Well, it opened with a Klingon funeral.
We could have used you.
With the Klingons marching through the audience, carrying the body, carrying torches.
The body and the torches.
And then, I don't know, we had 15 Klingons on stage screaming.
It was wonderful.
It was.
We got some experience on stage in straight plays and musicals with singing, and another one of our regular hosts on our shows teaches technical theater. At the college level. So.
We have Klingon number 3.
So perhaps remember us.
Okay.
Now, as I said, we talked to David Mack a while back, and he wrote the trilogy of Star Trek. Is it Destiny? Scott, Star Trek Destiny? Yeah,
the Destiny trilogy, and
where he got to
Cold Equations.
He got to pull characters from all over Star Trek and put them in this trilogy, and just created a big sandbox that, as a Star Trek fan, he had a lot of fun writing. So, when you guys were writing these books with William Shatner, you got to do all kinds of stuff. Like you got to write with the Borg, you got to do TNG, you got to do the mirror universe and all of that. So how much fun, just as Star Trek fans, was it to come up with those stories, to work on those stories?
It was incredible fun, especially working with the Deep Space Nine characters.
Yes.
Yeah. But for Federation, we packed that with a lot of people from Star Trek history, to the point where the Paramount readers were saying, pull back. Leave some of these characters for other writers. So, but that's right. Nobody ever said pull back to Mr. Shatner. So.
Yeah, because I remember that first one, which was Ashes of Eden, was a really great post Star Trek 6 story. But it was bookended with, some of the aftermath of Generations and everything. But then when The Return came out, as a Star Trek fan reading that book, it was just Captain Kirk came back to life and the Borg have him now. That was that's just as a fan, that was amazing. So,
well, I think that again, the writers who were involved, it was a huge group of writers. It was great because you got opportunities that you might not have gotten in any other series, and they were very open. They were very open. Well, I think we got almost all of our outlines went, but some of them, what were they missing? What were the ones that didn't go through?
The one when we pitched Memory Prime, we pitched three.
We pitched three. That was our first, and they hadn't even met us.
Yeah,
we were writing from Canada.
We pitched a time travel story where they go into the future, and they immediately said, "No, we're not even going to read this because there's a Klingon. We're doing Next Generation."
Yeah.
So, do you guys watch any of the current Star Trek stuff that's on?
We haven't so much lately because we've been so fully involved in
other universes.
Yes, like Bruce Colville's with Aliens. Yes, ate my homework. Yes. Aliens stole my body.
We haven't followed them as closely. It's one of those things. We have them on our PVR. And we're thinking, okay, now we'll take a week off and watch. But we get regular reports from friends in Los Angeles saying what's been going on, and
they're involved in things like, because again, and this is how JPL and NASA always seemed like Star Trek, is that the writers just fanned out, and just like they do, they go to all sorts of different projects in the tech world. All the writers go on to all sorts of ones, and the people who work on the productions. So, for instance, like For All Mankind has a lot of people from Trek on it. A lot of them, when you will be watching their programs, because we know where they've gone. And but really, it was sort of like the Star Trek Academy. Sent out people, just fanned out those writers, and they went everywhere. Just went everywhere.
How much fun was it for you guys to appear on camera in the finale for Enterprise?
Well, it was bittersweet because it was the last one.
I was in Gates McFadden's outfit. Yes. That's right. I remember.
No, that
was a really strange experience. We put into makeup and be sitting and
It was a funny thing because all the time we spent at Paramount. And, Rick Berman was so gracious and nice to us by opening up the entire production of Deep Space Nine and Voyager to us. And that was sort of like going to school because we got to sit in on every aspect. We were on stage talking to directors and that. And the entire time we were wandering around on Paramount lot looking at this stuff, we never once said to them, "Oh, we write scripts," because everybody was always trying to sell.
Everybody was always trying to sell them stuff, so we just
So
didn't say anything.
we were just the book writers, and they told us everything, and they were patient
and
with us, and
felt
it was
free
great.
because they knew that we would never be leaning on them for recommendations or jobs or anything.
Right.
And then one day, we were finishing up a nonfiction book for Paramount, or for Pocket Books, the one on Mars.
Yeah.
And
Going
it
to Mars.
was that day where we were turning in the final images. And so we would send some stuff in. The editor would call us 10 minutes later and say, well, how about this, this, and this? And we did it again. So we went through the whole morning like that. And finally, the editor said, okay, that's everything. Thank you. 10 minutes later, the phone rings. And I think, well, there's the editor again. There's one more thing. And it's our agent calling us to say, Manny Cotto had just spoken to him, and he wanted to know if we had ever done any television work.
And at that point, we had done 100 produced scripts.
And and it was for Enterprise.
And it was Enterprise.
Which we knew, which we loved. And so it was completely out of the blue. So our agent sent him some scripts, and then we got called in to meet with him and Brandon.
Yeah.
And it was great. And Brandon said, all the time you've been coming here.
Like, why now? Why are you here? And we said, it's because you called us. that was very funny. Yeah, that's right. But then, and then they, that was April, I think.
Yeah.
And we didn't hear anything more until August. They called us in, and within 2 weeks, we had an outline that was going to camera.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And most of your Enterprise work was on season 4, right?
Yeah,
so,
all of it.
Which I think, Scott, you'll agree with me, that's the best season, right?
If it's not the best, it's the second best.
Yeah.
For my money, I'm usually pretty quick to claim season 3 as my favorite season.
It's so different. That was so different.
Yeah. It was. Now, obviously, Deep Space Nine had played around with a long, overarching story.
Yes.
In the Dominion War, but Enterprise. This was the first time where virtually every episode of the season was a chapter in one story. Now they would take a few, a few side trips now and then, but for the most part, it was one long story told throughout that season. And Star Trek had never done that before, and I loved it. I also really loved the concept of the Xindi as a species with the 5 races in one species. And being a graphic artist, I love looking at the designs of the different Xindi races to see what's the same and what's different through all of them. I absolutely loved it. So I was hoping for more of that in season 4, and you get it and you don't get it at the same time because they're still telling bigger stories that you're not accustomed to from watching episodic Star Trek for so many decades. But now you're getting 2 and 3 part arcs that can take their time to let things expand and breathe and really flesh out a story, but without running the risk of hitting a slow spot or dragging or running out of gas before you get to the end of it. Yeah. It's a 3-episode story, bang, 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 and you're done. Get out of it. And they still carry over things from one arc to the subsequent arcs throughout that season. So it's not the same as season 3, but it's still fantastic. Seasons 3 and 4 put together are what make me so sad that there was no season 5. When that series came to an end, I was so disappointed.
They had Garf in the first second when he saw Scott fall on his side with guns in both hands.
Running across the snowy roof with his face.
and that just spoke to 14-year-old Gar.
Well, yes. And the other thing I loved about Enterprise, and again from the pilot, was that the Vulcans hated us. Because that to us was Star Trek. Because hold it, Vulcans are our best friends, but they didn't start out that way. And the whole thing of Star Trek that there are no enemies. You will. If we understand each other, we don't have to fight. And so that the Klingons were the enemy for the original series, and they're on their way to being friends in Next Generation.
There was a whole untold story in there, and that was so much fun with thinking of Vulcan covered by green glass from a nuclear war. It was just, we really enjoyed our time there, and we loved Manny's experimentation there. Yeah.
Can you guys tell me about your involvement with NASA? I know you You worked on
games.
the space policy workshop.
Star Trek.
Star Trek, because Rick
Yeah.
Berman got a call from the chief engineer, who this was back at the time of Pathfinder,
Yeah.
and he wanted to have somebody help tell the story of the team that was doing it. And Rick said, "Well, I have this husband and wife team, and I think they might do that for you." And that's how we ended up over at JPL.
Yeah. So Rick made the introductions. We went over.
And we spent
And-
7 years writing
Yeah.
through all the triumphs and the failures and
Mhm.
everything. And we just lived over there.
Mhm. So, and we'd go over to JPL and they'd say, "Oh, you know the folks at Star Trek? That's so cool." And we'd be at Star Trek. "Oh, you know the folks at JPL? That's so cool."
Oh, and on Enterprise, we took the chief engineer from
Oh, yeah.
JPL over to the green screen to show him Mars so that he could, and he actually set foot on the green screen where we got.
And he got shouted at
He
by
got
security.
shouted at, and he went into the engineering and he started trying to move all the little buttons and everything as if they worked.
Well, he recognized some of the components the Trip had stuck to the wall.
That's
He said,
right.
"Oh, that's an old construction."
That was the closest we were going to get.
Yeah.
That's right.
And you guys are you're working with the Imagineers at Disney to design rides and stuff now.
Well,
Well,
yeah,
actually,
we've done
we
it 3
did,
times now,
but
and
we
things
designed-
have slowed down.
We designed
For Shanghai,
sections. For Shanghai, we did Adventureland,
we were
which
on a
is
team
Adventure Isle.
that did it.
and we were
Yeah.
the lead writers for that
Yeah.
one. And
And then we did an entire park,
we did an entire park concept for them
and
as well.
and then
And then
went back for
We're
next
updating
year. Epcot is
Yeah.
having its 25th. now?
20. It's its 40th anniversary
Is it?
in 2022, and we were lead writers on setting the sort of inspiration for changing.
Mhm.
Oh, okay.
If you go to YouTube and look at any of the Disney fan videos about Walt Disney World, it's incredible what they're doing there.
What we were involved in as lead writers, you're involved in the very first thing. It's like the beginning on the train,
Mhm.
and so you're in the beginning of the train. It's blue sky.
Yeah.
And that means probably 2% of what you have given them will end up in the caboose.
Yeah.
But it's a great deal of fun,
Oh, yes.
and it's incredible what
Mhm.
Imagineers do.
You guys have worked with you've written with William Shatner. You worked on the show for Enterprise, so you've had interactions with Star Trek personalities and things like that. So, as Star Trek fans, do you have a story that is like your fan moment where you fanned out from meeting a Star Trek personality?
Yes. I will. I'll say
Is there?
yes. There was that time. What were the Mirror Universe episodes of Enterprise? I've forgotten the title.
In a Mirror Darkly.
In the Mirror Darkly. Okay, so the big thing there was they recreated a Constitution class starship, right? And it was one of those times where everybody worked overtime and they were so keen to reproduce this thing. And we went on to set and we were walking along the corridor. So we were walking along the Constitution class starship corridor and the phone rings and it buzzed because you don't put on the ringer. And I looked at it just to see who I was going to call back after we'd finished on set. And it was Shatner calling. And so I said into the phone, I said, "Bill, before you say anything, I got to tell you where we are." That was
That's
fair.
right.
And I guess there was one other time before that, and it's sort of a Hollywood, it's a fan thing. And we would wander around the Paramount lot. And I always remember this one day, we walked around the corner. And
studio, and it was Studio 41 or something.
It was the Borg. We're playing Frisbee and hanging out and smoking cigarettes with the Coneheads. No camera. We wouldn't have been allowed to take the picture anyway.
Couldn't have ever.
But these were the actors in full makeup and costume.
That was just
And they
great.
were just outside to get some fresh air between shots. It
That's
was
right.
wonderful.
Yeah. There's a production company not too far from where I live, a couple hours driving distance, that they have recreated the Enterprise bridge, sick bay, engineering, and they use it for fan films. and they'll let fan film production companies come in and they'll pay them to use their sets and things like that. And one of our co-hosts has actually gone down there and taken some pictures, but they completely recreated the bridge. I mean, and Rick actually went and visited the one in Georgia, and he said he walking onto that.
Yeah.
He cried because it brought so many feelings and memories from his childhood back, just walking onto that bridge.
Oh, it would be. So, there was one that was Jeff Bezos with these. Oh. With the string and the cardboard and creation. It was.
We were at an event
in Seattle. It was in Seattle at Paula Allen's museum.
Yeah, at the Sci-Fi Museum there.
Yeah.
And Jeff Bezos was being honored with a Star Trek award.
Yeah.
And what was so cool about Jeff Bezos standing up there talking, he had brought some items from his childhood that his mom had saved. And it was the tricorder and communicator he had made from string and Bristol board. So he could put Star Trek. He had a little folded piece of Bristol board that was his
and he brought it
communicator.
To show everybody. Yeah.
Scott, were you about to say something?
I was just going to gush about how I would probably react similarly to Rick if I were to have the chance to walk onto a set recreation.
Yeah.
Being, what was I, 8 years old when Next Generation premiered. Mm-hmm. And my parents were fans of Star Trek, and they not huge fans, but they liked it. They liked it fine. My brother, who is 3 years older than I am, was already getting into the original series before Next Generation came out, and because in those early young days, I didn't like my brother. He was a meanie. I didn't like him, which means I didn't like Star Trek. Well, until the whole family started watching Next Generation. Yeah. Once the whole family started watching Next Generation, beginning with Encounter at Farpoint, okay, fine, I like Star Trek. And it started to grow from there. Yeah. So with Next Generation being the series that I was raised on more than any other, the family made it a habit of recording every episode onto VHS as it aired. So my brother and I had the entire series on VHS, and we would just throw in a tape. It would have about 6 episodes on it, and just let it play. Grab another one, put it in, just let it play. It would be background in the house. So I can quote an uncomfortable amount of that series at this point.
That's exactly the art department of Star Trek. They always had original series episodes playing in the background.
Always.
And, at key lines, you'd hear 3 voices quoting the line as the actor said it.
It's a little bit like Rocky Horror.
Yes.
That's right.
Right. So some people will play music as they're falling asleep. And I do that during the week. If I have to work the next day or the next night, I'll have a certain selection of music that I will play. But when we get to the weekend, I'll put some Next Generation or some Deep Space Nine on my phone and just put it off to the side. And I'll just set the sleep timer and just lay down. And I'll let the phone decide what episodes to play. It'll just, in random order, just shuffle some Star Trek.
Wow.
And it doesn't matter what it plays. I know what's happening. And if I had the chance to walk onto the bridge of a Galaxy class Enterprise, I know I would be speechless.
Yeah.
It was hard enough to contain myself when playing. I'm not sure how familiar the two of you are with Star Trek Online, the online role playing game.
Yes, sure.
For PlayStation, Xbox, etc. I have a PlayStation just for that game. It's the only reason I bought it was so I could continue playing that game.
Yeah.
And when I convinced my wife at the time to let me spend a little actual money so I could download the Galaxy class interiors, and I just had my character running around a Galaxy class ship.
Yes.
I go to the bridge, I go down to engineering, and once I step in and I see that huge warp core jumping up and down on the couch, I just couldn't sit still because it was such a delight to be able to see that. If I could walk onto a physical set, I would just fall apart.
Tremendous appeal for that. Yeah.
I remember the first time we walked onto the Voyager bridge, and the level of detail in that thing was, and they explained to us, they said, well, we're building this thing, it's going to last 7 years.
Yeah.
So everything was solid. It's stitching in the leather.
It feels so real, and
Yeah.
all the corridors connected.
Yep.
Yeah,
Soon you'll get Apple glasses or something,
you'll be able to do
and
it.
you'll be able to see photoreal
That's it.
and spending more than actual
More
money.
money.
Right. Someone will come up with a way to program an LCARS user interface for smartphones. So I can tell my iPhone to present itself like an LCARS screen from next generation. I keep waiting for someone to come up with that one of these days. And I have read some reports that they have enough recordings of Majel Barrett's voice from all of her work as the computer that they could create an AI voice like Siri.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
with her voice instead. So you have the actual voice of the computer and an actual LCARS interface for the phone.
We've seen
for that day.
We've seen the LCARS interface for the phone. So we know it's been designed a couple of times. I can't remember what apps it was for. Maybe it was never. And there was one very early iPhone thing where it just made your screen look like a communicator. And if you went like that with the phone, you'd get the inside of the communicator.
I used to have that one.
Yeah, well,
and I do have an RSS app that it was designed to use an LCARS interface, but that's just with that one app.
Right.
I'm waiting for like an overlay of the entire operating system. So the basic functions of the phone would look like an LCARS display. I'd pay money for that.
I remember watching. I saw an interview with. So in 2009, they did the Star Trek reboot, right, with the J.J. Abrams reboot of Star Trek, and sometime around then, I saw William Shatner in an interview on like the Tonight Show or something like that, and they asked him, "So, what did you think about this new Star Trek, where they go back and they show how Kirk got into the Academy and all that?" And said, I already wrote that book.
There's always a story for everything.
Yes.
Yeah. He's talking about Academy Collision course. Yeah.
That's right.
That was,
Stories not told.
Stories not told. Yeah.
What are you guys working on right now? We can be looking out for
more series.
Probably nothing we can tie. We have a big science fiction series that is now fully developed. They're signing a director. We've told, any moment now. Yeah. And then the producers will go knocking.
And then we have another preschool.
Oh yeah.
ages 3 to 5.
We wrote 2 movies for Netflix for Universal, based on Bruce Colville books. Aliens Ate My Homework and Aliens Stole My Body.
Yes.
And this was designed for a real young audience. They were live action.
So it was wonderful. We could
really wacky, really fun. Bill did a voice for one of the characters
did,
in the first one.
We made him all
yeah. Yes. And that was so much fun going back to doing some kids stuff that we had an animated project that we had been thinking about for a while.
And we're in development on that now.
Yeah, so we sold that, which was great.
Yeah.
And then we're writing the first script in what we hope will be just a limited series. It's interesting. It's the first script we're writing that's like our techno thriller books.
Except it's based on a real event.
A real event, but it's a techno thriller in the 1950s.
Yeah, in Canada.
So,
but ends up being something that ended up stalking the original NASA.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that's fun.
It's
all development.
But that's like a John le Carré type one with spies and Russian moles and all that stuff, but it's real.
And the beginning of not NASA, but the beginning of the NASA, because that's what they called it for the first 2 years.
Yeah. Thank y'all very much for giving us this time. We appreciate you taking time with us today.
Listen, thank you for making us go back and reread Federation.
I enjoyed going back and listening to the audiobook. It brought back a lot of memories from that story from back in the day. Anytime I'm able to have Star Trek authors that I used to read when I was younger come on, now that I'm in my 40s, and I can go back and revisit that work, it's just it's a joy.